So I just saw the latest Mission Impossible movie in the theaters. I believe this is Mission Impossible 8 now, Dead Reckoning. This is, well, I don't need to tell you, this is an old franchise at this point. It's so old that I first saw Mission Impossible 1 in the theaters when I was in high school. That's how old I am. That's how old this franchise is. And like a lot of you, I suspect, I don't have strong feelings about the Mission Impossible movie franchise. I will happily see it if it's on. I can just as happily forget about it if it's not on. I would not ordinarily seek this out in the movie theaters, but I was invited to go. And so I said, sure, why not? My nephew was in town, so my dad and my nephew and my brother-in-law and I all decided to go out to the movies, and this was what was showing, so we saw Mission Impossible 8. So I guess like a lot of you, I've not seen all of the Mission Impossibles. I saw 1 when it was in theaters. I saw number 2 on DVD while I was living in Japan. And then number 3 I just never got around to seeing. I mean, no particular reason, I just never got around to seeing it. I was looking this up on Wikipedia just now, and number 3 came out in 2006. Number 2 came out in 2000. So that's a big 6-year gap between movies. Long enough for the audience to forget about them. But yeah, number 4 I didn't get around to seeing for the same reason. Number 5 I saw in the theaters. This was back in 2015. My Vietnamese girlfriend, now wife, invited me out to see it, and I went out and I saw it. Number 5 was good. A fun little movie. I was surprised when I came in at number 5 after not having seen 3 and 4. That there was an ensemble crew that had developed. So in the first 2, it was mainly just Tom Cruise. I mean, Luther, the Ving Rhames character, was helping him a bit. But by 5, you had, what's his name? The guy who plays Hawkeye, Jeremy Renner, I believe, was part of the crew. Also Simon Pegg, who I like a lot of his comedies. He's famous for what's that called? The 3 Flavours Cornetto ice cream trilogy, Shaun of the Dead, World's End, and I'm blanking on the middle one. Anyways, you guys know Simon Pegg, right? So yeah, I was happy to see him in the movie. Thought it was decent. And then I did not see 6 or 7, and here we are at number 8. So I'm going to go, I went through all that history because it is kind of relevant here for a couple reasons. Number 1 is that this 8th installment is part of a 2-parter. So it picks up directly where Mission Impossible 7 left off, and I never saw Mission Impossible 7. So to a certain extent, I was a little bit lost at the beginning of the movie. But the other reason this is relevant is this latest Mission Impossible is very nostalgic. So it starts off with like a clip show of all the previous Mission Impossible movies. And then throughout the first, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's constantly giving flashbacks to the previous Mission Impossible movies. And it's tying in various points of continuity. A lot of callback characters from the earlier movies come back for cameos or even expanded roles. Maybe I'll talk about that more in a second. I found the whole thing to be a little bit strange because I don't really care that much about the Mission Impossible movies. I mean, I'll happily watch them. They're decent action movies. But I don't really care about these characters so much. I mean, I like Simon Pegg. everybody likes Tom Cruise as a movie star, but he's got a very bland personality as a movie star, right? So the way I look at these Mission Impossible movies is they're kind of like James Bond movies. You go in, you pay your price of admission, you watch the action, and then you come out and you forget about it. And when you go into a James Bond movie 3 or 4 years later, you don't expect that James Bond movie to be like, remember the previous 7 movies in the franchise, because you'd be like, no, I don't remember the previous 7 James Bond movies. I forgot them as soon as I saw them. Why are you calling back to this? But the Mission Impossible franchise, at least this latest installment, is assuming that the audience base is feeling tremendously nostalgic for all these past Mission Impossible movies. And I don't know, maybe there's a hardcore fan base out there, but that's not most people, right? I just found the whole thing a little bit bizarre. Now, it's a little bit unclear if you go to the Wikipedia page whether or not this is the final installment in the series. On the one hand, Tom Cruise is saying he wants to keep making these movies until he's in his 80s, just like Harrison Ford did with Indiana Jones. On the other hand, I guess studio executives are saying, yes, this is the final movie. It's called The Final Reckoning. I'm forgetting the title already, because it's supposed to be the final one. So, a little bit of some conflicting information there, but apparently this is supposed to be the final Mission Impossible movie. So I guess that explains some of the nostalgia that the movie is trying to milk. I find it a little bit interesting that Tom Cruise said he'd like to continue making these into his 80s like Harrison Ford did for Indiana Jones. Because Tom Cruise is not Harrison Ford, and this is not Indiana Jones. So, Indiana Jones, I think, was a unique, interesting, distinctive character. That so much so that you'd be willing to come back to see Indiana Jones in his 1980s just because you liked Harrison Ford's gruff portrayal of him all that much. But Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, it's a serviceable character. He does the hero type things, but it's not that interesting of a character, right? Okay, so I've gotten that out of my system mostly. The interesting thing, or the weird thing, if you haven't seen some of the previous movies, like I haven't, is there are all these callbacks to earlier movies. And of course, some of them I recognized. I'm like, okay, that was Mission Impossible 1, I saw that one. Oh, that's a flashback to Mission Impossible 2, okay, I remember that one. Philip Seymour Hoffman, I never saw 3, but I recognize him, okay. But then there's also a lot of flashbacks to the previous movie, because the plot of this movie was set up in the previous movie, because they were a two-parter. So there are a lot of these flashbacks where I'm like, okay, is this a nostalgic flashback, or is this a flashback directly towards the previous movie, because I didn't see it. And then there were some flashbacks where you're like, was that flashback even in the previous movie, or is this supposed to be a new revelation that we, the audience, are getting this for the first time now? It's all a little bit confusing when you're coming into this not having seen the previous movie. Now, the reviews had said what they predictably say for these Mission Impossible movies, which is, it's a little bit bland, but there are some great action scenes in it. And that's what I was expecting. And that's eventually what I got. But I was confused by how long it took this movie to get itself moving. There just seemed to be a lot of exposition in the beginning. It just took a long time for stuff to get moving, and then we got those constant flashbacks to earlier movies. That plus, this is a really kind of trippy plot at points. There's this super-powered computer called the Entity. One point, Tom Cruise goes into this chamber to talk to the Entity. It's not quite clear what the Entity wants, and it's you're thinking, okay, what is this movie? What am I watching? Add to that, there's a lot of quick cuts, and I know quick cuts are somewhat maybe modern cinema. This has come into style more. But I just found all these quick cuts jarring. When there were quick cuts in the action sequence, it made the action a little bit hard to follow. Some action scenes are more guilty of this than others. Some of them were all right. Some of them just had a lot of quick cuts that they were difficult to follow. I've heard some people hypothesize, not with this movie, but in previous movies, that perhaps the quick cuts are there because of the aging of the action stars. So, you know, Tom Cruise is 62. He looks really good, but, you know, maybe he's not moving as fast as a younger man, and that's why they do all these quick cuts. I don't know. But they also do quick cuts, at least in the beginning, when people are just standing around and giving exposition. And I found that really jarring. Yeah. So, kids are calling my name. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Because of all that. Oh, okay, guys. Daddy's making a video, and then I'll be down for dinner, okay? Okay. Bye-bye. Yeah, what was I saying? So because of all that, the beginning of the movie, I had a little bit of a hard time getting into it. Although, to be fair, once it picks up and starts moving, then it does start moving, and then we get some decent action scenes. But it takes a while, and the beginning is really weird. In a strange, like, who is in charge of this movie type way? Like, why is it like this? I don't know. Now, I've read a few reviews of this movie that said the plot is just about impossible to parse. And I'd have to go along with that. Now, part of this is no doubt because I didn't see the previous movie that this picks up from. But there are all these moving parts in the plot that I'm not quite sure how they fit together. So there's this entity, there's this computer program, and the Luther character has designed a poison pill that they give the entity. But for some reason, the poison pill is not enough. For some reason, they need to combine the poison pill with the source code. Okay, so Tom Cruise has got to go get the source code, which it turns out, spoilers, is located on a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. So that's the first objective. I only vaguely understand why they can't just upload the poison pill, why they have to combine it with the source code. But then once they do that, they've got to trap the entity in this cylinder type thing. So they plug it into the computer's, spoilers, I'm going to spoil everything. And then it's supposed to go into that capsule. So I was discussing this with my dad and my nephew and my brother-in-law after we saw it. And I'm like, okay, well, if they all they wanted to do was to trap the entity in this, why did they even need the poison pill? Were they poisoning the entity or trapping the entity? So, and somebody said, well, the poison pill was so that they could, so that the entity would go into the cylinder thing in the first place. I thought the entity was going into the cylinder thing because they were tricking it into thinking that that's where the nuclear missiles launching was. Maybe it was a poison pill that did that trick. I don't know. There are various people who spring out and attack Tom Cruise or other characters for no apparent reason. And if you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking specifically of the guy who attacks Tom Cruise out of nowhere when Tom Cruise is on the submarine. Now, there was a line of dialogue when Tom Cruise says, "Wait, who are you? Why are you doing this?" And the guy says something, and I didn't hear it, and neither did any of the people I went to the movie with. We all couldn't figure it out. And then, again, if you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. The guy who tries to assassinate the president at the end. What was that? I suspect both of these characters were characters who worked for the entity. Now, why the humans are working for this evil computer program, I don't know. Maybe I guess this was set up in the previous movie. Also, there's some ticking clock thing about how all the entity is gaining control of all the nuclear missiles. So the president is advised to take out the other countries that have the nuclear missiles before the entity can launch them. But of course, launching a preemptive strike against the other countries, even if they are being controlled by the entity, is still going to be seen as starting World War III. So at one point, the president's advisors say it might be diplomatically prudent to offer up a sacrifice, nuke one of the American cities as well. And I'm thinking, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why would that happen? How would that help anything? Again, maybe I missed something. I don't know why you nuking in an American city. I don't know. So, yeah, lots of things that seemed hard to follow. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. If somebody were to sit me down and talk me through this plot step by step, maybe it does all make sense. But it was hard to follow. And if reviews are anything to go by, apparently I'm not the only one who found the plot a little bit difficult to parse. But the movie does come through in some of the big action scenes. So there are two big set pieces. Spoiling everything, so I might as well spoil this now. One is the submarine at the bottom of the ocean. And the other one is the airplane climax at the end. I've read some reviewers that said the submarine sequence at the middle of the movie was the highlight. And I agree it was impressive. But for me, that airplane action set piece at the end, that was spectacular. That was, okay, this is why we go to the movie theaters. This is a spectacle that deserves to be seen on the big screen. That was just a great action sequence of them jumping around on the planes and fighting on the planes, and yeah, I thought that was just a spectacular sequence. And when that finished, the movie had completely won me over. I thought, okay, fair enough. This is something that deserves to be seen on the big screen. Now, these action sequences involve a fair amount of suspension of disbelief. Because watching them that they're utterly ridiculous, and that the human body doesn't actually work like this, and that there's no way Tom Cruise would even be surviving any of this. And I think we were discussing this again, me and my dad and my brother-in-law and my nephew, after the movie. I think to a certain extent this goes all the way back to the first Mission Impossible movie. And again, I haven't seen them all, but certainly Mission Impossible 1 and 2 both contained at least one stunt where you're like, okay, That's impressive, but it's a little bit unbelievable. As movies have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, just because I guess that's what movies do, the unbelievable parts have gotten longer and bigger and stuff like that. So, that plane sequence we had at the end here just completely blows out of the water anything you would have seen from Mission Impossible 1 and 2 back in the 90s. But the point being, the point being, you do expect some sort of suspension of disbelief with these movies, but suspension of disbelief, you don't want the film to ask too much of your suspension of disbelief. And watching that scene with the submarine, especially the ending where Tom Cruise was just miraculously okay after everything that had happened, you want to kind of say to yourself, it's a little bit funny because the movie itself goes through a lot of effort to emphasize how dangerous decompression is. Swimming up under that pressure too rapidly, you'll get the bends. It'll cause all sorts of problems with your muscles, and it will be a horrible death. And I think to a large extent, if the movie hadn't emphasized this so much, I think, we as the audience, at least me, could have forgotten about a lot of that stuff. I mean, I forget stuff like that all the time. I know it's somewhere in my brain, but if I'm enthralled by an action sequence, I can temporarily forget about the dangers of decompression when you're scuba diving, etc. But because the movie had emphasized the dangers of decompression so many times, and then for Tom Cruise to just ignore all of that and just be miraculously okay at the end of that sequence, you're like, okay, I guess I'm just going to go along with this. It's a movie, I'm supposed to suspend disbelief, but it does take you out of the magic a little bit. To a lesser extent, the airplane sequence as well. Tom Cruise is hanging on to the airplane with his bare knuckles as the plane is spinning around and doing all this stuff. And you're thinking, gee, those G-forces there, they would rip him right off the plane. I don't care how strong his grip is. He wouldn't be able to hang on with that. And part of your brain is thinking that, and the other part of your brain is thinking, okay, just shut up about that for a minute. This is a fantastic sequence. Don't ruin it with realism. Just let it play out. And you've got to treat these movies as kind of like live action cartoons to a certain extent. Yeah. So the action sequences are incredible, but you've really got to work hard on your suspension of disbelief to fully get into that. But they are spectacular feats. And it's the kind of thing where as we were leaving the theater, we were like, wow, how did they film that? I mean, I know a lot of it's got to be CGI these days. I do know that Tom Cruise does all his own stunts. But I'm sure they still use movie magic to assist him in his stunts, right? Stuntmen still use all the tricks of the trade. But yeah. So in conclusion, I didn't even talk about the callbacks, right? Well, if you've seen the movie, then you already know. But they get a few minor characters from the first movie for these callbacks. The first movie, I said at the top of this review that nobody remembers these movies, but I think the first movie we remember relatively well, right? That was a big deal at its time. People my age saw it in the theaters and then saw it a couple more times on VHS when it came out. Certainly the spectacular scenes in that movie, which were on all the commercials back in the 90s, etc., are seared into our brains a little bit. So when they brought back that computer guy who had been the guy who had come in when Tom Cruise was doing his hang by the wires scene, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I do remember that scene. I'd forgotten that particular guy, but okay, fair enough, he was there. It was a little bit weird that they did this extended callback to him, and he had such a big part in the movie, but this movie, for whatever reason, thought its fans really wanted this. There's a few other characters from the first movie who come back for these big for parts. And then there's a bizarre thing where the son of Jim Phelps, who was the villain from the first movie, Jim Phelps, of course, in turn was the protagonist from the TV show, but forget about that for the moment. He was the villain from the first movie. His son is in this last movie. And he has a dialogue between himself and Tom Cruise where they talk about his father's legacy and stuff like that. And, you know, it's a callback to the earliest movie, the first movie, trying to make us nostalgic for the first movie. At the same time, it is kind of a bit of a bizarre choice. And I think, unless I'm missing something, you could cut that character out and not lose anything. You could certainly cut out the whole thing about how his dad was Jim Phelps, the villain from the first movie. You could cut that right out and not lose anything. It doesn't really seem to impact the rest of the movie at all. So it's a bit of a bizarre thing to throw in there. Other than that, like I said, this movie has some sort of bizarre nostalgia fixation for the franchise. I guess has developed a bizarre nostalgia fixation for itself, despite the fact that I don't think any of the fans view it that way. At least I don't. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much.